I stood in the conference room at Trailhead Lodge, watching Sarah Williams spread topographical maps across the mahogany table with the confidence of someone who owned every inch of wilderness they depicted. My ex-boyfriend Derek sat beside her, nodding enthusiastically as she outlined her vision for the Whispering Pines Trail expansion. What none of them knew was that the revolutionary trail impact assessment methodology she was presenting to our potential clients was based entirely on my proprietary research I had spent 3 years developing in secret, research that could make or break the biggest environmental consulting contract of my career.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Derek's eyes met mine across the table with that familiar mixture of smugness and calculated charm that had taken me years to recognize. Maya, I think you'll be really impressed with Scout's approach to sustainable trail development. Her innovative assessment techniques are exactly what the National Park Service is looking for. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Sarah Scout Williams, the woman who had accompanied Derek on countless hiking expeditions while we were together, who had listened to our late-night conversations about environmental impact studies, who had absorbed every detail of my methodology through casual dinner table discussions, was now presenting my life's work as her own breakthrough innovation. As Michael Brooks from the National Park Service leaned forward with obvious interest, I faced the most crucial decision of my professional life. Should I expose the truth and risk destroying the delicate ecosystem of relationships that sustained our small mountain community? Or watch silently as my intellectual property launched someone else's career into the stratosphere while mine withered in the shadows? 3 months earlier, I had received what I thought was the opportunity of a lifetime. Ryan Thompson, my business partner at GreenPath Environmental Consulting, burst into our Pine Ridge office with news that the National Park Service was soliciting proposals for the largest trail expansion project in Pacific Northwest history. The Whispering Pines Trail Network, already spanning over 150 miles through Cascade Valley's most pristine wilderness, was slated for a massive expansion that would add another 75 miles of interconnected trails, complete with eco-friendly camping facilities and educational stations, designed to accommodate the growing demand for sustainable outdoor tourism. The contract was worth $3.7 million over 5 years, with the potential for ongoing maintenance and monitoring agreements that could secure our small firm's future indefinitely. More importantly for me, it represented validation of everything I had worked towards since completing my master's degree in environmental science 6 years ago. This wasn't just about money or business growth, it was about proving that a woman-owned consulting firm operating out of a converted cabin in a town most people couldn't find on a map could compete with the established corporations that typically dominated government contracts. Ryan paced excitedly around our cramped office space, gesturing toward the mountains visible through our windows. Maya, this is it. This is what we've been building toward. Your trail impact methodology is light years ahead of anything the big firms are using. We actually have a shot at this. My trail impact methodology had consumed the better part of 3 years to develop. Traditional environmental assessments focus primarily on immediate ecological disruption during trail construction, but my approach incorporated long-term predictive modeling that accounted for wildlife migration patterns, soil composition changes, water table impacts, and even the psychological effects of increased human presence on sensitive species. The methodology combines satellite imagery analysis, ground-penetrating radar data, biological surveys, and computer modeling to create comprehensive impact projections that were accurate within 5% over 20-year periods. The breakthrough had come during my relationship with Derek, owner of Summit Adventures, Cascade Valley's most successful adventure tourism company. Derek's business involved guiding clients through the existing trail network, and his intimate knowledge of wildlife behavior patterns had provided crucial real-world data that enhanced my theoretical models. During our 2-year relationship, I had spent countless evenings refining my methodology, often discussing complex ecological relationships with Derek and whoever happened to be joining us for dinner. Sarah Williams had been a frequent guest at those dinners. Sarah, or as everyone called her, Scout, had been Derek's hiking partner long before I came into the picture. She possessed an almost supernatural understanding of wilderness navigation and had guided some of the most challenging expeditions in the region. Her knowledge of terrain was encyclopedic, her physical endurance legendary, and her ability to read weather patterns and animal behavior bordered on mystical. What she lacked was formal scientific training or any background in environmental assessment methodology. During our relationship, Derek often invited Scout to join our conversations about my work. She would listen intently as I explained the complexities of ecosystem modeling, asking thoughtful questions about the relationship between trail placement and wildlife corridors, the long-term effects of increased foot traffic on soil composition, and the methodology I was developing to predict and minimize environmental impact. At the time, I had appreciated her genuine interest and had been flattered by her eager questions about my research. Our dinner conversations had covered every aspect of my methodology in detail. Sarah had been particularly fascinated by my innovative approach to predicting wildlife displacement, which combined traditional biological surveys with advanced computer modeling to forecast how different species would adapt to increased human presence. She had asked detailed questions about my data collection techniques, my analysis software, and even the specific algorithms I used to weight different environmental factors in my predictive models. I had been generous with information, perhaps naively so. The small mountain community fostered a culture of collaboration and shared knowledge. Environmental protection was everyone's concern, and I had viewed our discussions as contributing to the collective understanding that would help preserve Cascade Valley's pristine wilderness. Besides, Scout's practical experience complemented my scientific approach.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Beautifully. Her observations about animal behavior patterns had actually helped refine several aspects of my methodology. My relationship with Derek had ended 8 months ago, not with dramatic confrontation, but with the slow realization that we wanted fundamentally different things from life. Derek was content to build his adventure tourism business within existing parameters, guiding clients through established trails and focusing on immediate experiences rather than long-term environmental stewardship. I was driven by the need to push boundaries, to develop new approaches to conservation that could serve as models for wilderness preservation globally. The breakup had been amicable, if emotionally complicated. Derek and I had maintained a professional relationship out of necessity. His business and my consulting work overlapped significantly in our small community. Scout had naturally remained part of Derek's inner circle while gradually fading from my social interactions. I had assumed she would continue her role as a skilled but informal guide, helping Derek's clients navigate the wilderness while leaving the scientific and regulatory aspects to qualified professionals. The morning Ryan and I submitted our proposal to the National Park Service, I felt cautiously optimistic about our chances. My methodology was genuinely innovative, our local knowledge was unmatched, and our proposal offered a level of detailed environmental protection that the larger firms simply couldn't replicate. We had spent weeks crafting a presentation that showcased not just our technical capabilities, but our deep commitment to preserving Cascade Valley's ecological integrity while accommodating responsible tourism growth. Michael Brooks, the National Park Service Regional Director overseeing the contract award, had visited our office personally to review our preliminary proposal. A thoughtful man in his mid-40s with graying temples and the weathered complexion of someone who spent significant time outdoors, Brooks had been impressed by the depth of our environmental analysis and the practical applicability of my methodology to the Whispering Pines expansion. "Your approach to predictive impact modeling is exactly what we need," he had told us during his visit. "Traditional assessments give us a snapshot of current conditions, but your methodology allows us to anticipate and mitigate problems before they develop. That's the kind of forward-thinking approach the Park Service wants to emphasize in all our future projects." Brooks had left our office with copies of our complete methodology documentation, promising a decision within 6 weeks. Ryan and I had celebrated that evening with expensive wine and tentative plans for expanding our business if we won the contract. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. 2 weeks later, Emma Collins, my best friend since college and the only person in Pine Ridge who knew the complete details of my methodology, called with disturbing news. Emma worked as a freelance graphic designer and often contracted with local businesses for marketing materials. Derek had approached her about creating promotional materials for Summit Adventures, mentioning that they were partnering with a new consultant for an upcoming major project. "Maya, there's something weird going on."
Emma said during our phone conversation. Derek was talking about this revolutionary new approach to trail impact assessment that his partner Scout has developed. The way he described it sounded exactly like your methodology. I mean, exactly like it, down to the specific terminology you use. My initial reaction had been dismissive. Technical terminology in environmental science often sounded similar across different approaches. Perhaps Scout had developed something that shared superficial similarities with my work, but differed in substantial ways. The possibility that she might be appropriating my methodology seemed too brazen to be credible. Emma persisted with her concerns. Maya, I am serious. He mentioned predictive modeling based on wildlife migration patterns, soil composition analysis, and even something about psychological effects on sensitive species. Those aren't common concepts. That's your specific approach. A cold realization began forming in my stomach. Scout had been present for dozens of detailed discussions about my methodology. She had asked penetrating questions about every aspect of my research, questions I had answered enthusiastically because I believed she was genuinely interested in learning about environmental science. She had observed my data collection techniques during field surveys Derek and I had conducted together. She had even been present when I demonstrated my analysis software and explained the algorithms that drove my predictive models. I tried to convince myself that coincidence could explain the similarities Emma described. Environmental consulting involved certain standard approaches and terminology. Perhaps Scout had developed something that shared superficial similarities with my work but differed in substantial ways. The possibility that she might be appropriating my methodology seemed too brazen to be credible. The full scope of the situation became clear the following week when Ryan discovered that a competing proposal had been submitted to the National Park Service by a previously unknown consulting entity called Wilderness Analytics. The proposal's author was listed as Sarah Williams, with Derek Martinez's Summit Adventures as the primary local partner for implementation. Ryan had learned about the competing proposal through his contacts at the National Park Service. Apparently, Wilderness Analytics had submitted their materials just 3 days before the deadline, claiming to offer a revolutionary approach to trail impact assessment that surpassed traditional environmental consulting methodologies. They're using almost identical language to our proposal, Ryan reported after reviewing the public portions of the competing submission. They're promising predictive impact modeling, wildlife displacement forecasting, and long-term ecological protection strategies. Maya, this can't be coincidence.
Just similar concepts to my methodology, but identical technical approaches, the same data sources, and even the specific software applications I had developed for analysis. She had somehow gained access to enough information about my research to replicate its essential elements while presenting the work as her own original innovation. The betrayal cut deeper than Derek's infidelity would have. This wasn't just personal. It was the theft of my professional identity and the hijacking of years of intellectual effort. The implications extended beyond simple plagiarism. If Scout won the contract using my methodology, she would establish herself as a leading authority in trail impact assessment. Future projects would reference her work, academic papers would cite her innovations, and my original research would become footnotes in someone else's career trajectory. Worse, Scout lacked the technical background to properly implement the methodology she had stolen. Her attempt to apply techniques she didn't fully understand could result in environmental damage that would reflect poorly on approaches I had developed. I spent sleepless nights weighing my options. Proving plagiarism would require demonstrating that Scout had inappropriately accessed my proprietary research, but most of her exposure to my methodology had occurred during social interactions that I had initiated. I had freely shared information that I now realized should have remained confidential. My generosity and trust had become the weapons used against me. Legal action was theoretically possible, but proving intellectual property theft in a small community where information flowed freely through personal relationships would be complex and expensive. More importantly, pursuing litigation would destroy the collaborative relationships that made working in Cascade Valley possible.
Environmental consulting in our region depended on cooperation between businesses, government agencies, and community organizations. Accusations of theft and betrayal would poison that ecosystem permanently. Yet doing nothing felt like professional suicide. Allowing Scout to present my work as her own would validate the theft and encourage similar appropriation in the future. It would send the message that intellectual property meant nothing in our community and that hard work could be hijacked without consequence. As the evaluation deadline approached, Michael Brooks contacted both consulting teams to arrange final presentations at Trailhead Lodge. The presentations would allow each team to showcase their methodology and respond to questions from the evaluation committee. Brooks emphasized that these presentations would be the decisive factor in contract award, giving both teams equal opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities. I realized this presentation would be my opportunity to expose the truth, but the stakes couldn't be higher. Accusing Scout of plagiarism in front of the National Park Service Evaluation Committee would either vindicate my position or destroy my credibility permanently. If I was wrong about the extent of Scout's appropriation, or if I couldn't prove my case convincingly, the accusation would backfire spectacularly. The night before the presentation, I sat in my riverside cabin reviewing every detail of my original research, comparing it with what I knew about Scout's proposal. The parallels were undeniable, but presenting them effectively would require careful strategy and irrefutable evidence. I had one chance to reclaim my intellectual property and preserve my professional future, but failure would mean losing everything I had worked to build in Cascade Valley. As I prepared for what would either be my greatest professional triumph or my most devastating defeat, I couldn't help but reflect on the bitter irony of the situation. The methodology I had developed to protect wilderness from human impact was being used against me by someone who understood neither its scientific foundations nor its ethical implications. Tomorrow's presentation would determine whether innovation and integrity could triumph over appropriation and betrayal, or whether my career would become another casualty of misplaced trust in a community I had believed shared my values. Parts 2 through 5. The Unraveling Truth. The Trailhead Lodge conference room buzzed with nervous energy as both consulting teams prepared for their presentations. I arrived 30 minutes early, hoping to settle my nerves and review my materials one final time before facing what could be the most important hour of my professional life. The historic lodge, built in 1923 from massive Douglas fir logs, had hosted countless significant meetings over the decades, but none felt more consequential to me than this morning's evaluation session. Michael Brooks and his evaluation committee had arranged the room with meticulous attention to detail. A large projection screen dominated the front wall, flanked by detailed topographical maps of the Whispering Pines Trail network. The committee table was positioned to give the 5 evaluators optimal viewing angles, while presenter podiums were set up to encourage dynamic presentations rather than static lectures. Everything about the setup emphasized the National Park Service's commitment to making an informed, thorough decision about this crucial contract. I had chosen my outfit carefully that morning, selecting professional attire that projected competence while remaining practical enough for potential field demonstrations. My navy blazer paired with hiking boots might have seemed unconventional in other settings, but here in Cascade Valley, it signaled someone who understood both the scientific rigor and practical realities of wilderness management. I carried my presentation materials in a leather portfolio that had been a graduation gift from Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, my mentor, and the woman who had first encouraged me to develop my innovative approach to environmental assessment. Ryan arrived shortly after me carrying the technical equipment we would need for our presentation. His face reflected the same mixture of excitement and anxiety that had kept both of us awake most of the previous night. We had rehearsed our presentation countless times, refining every transition and anticipating potential questions from the evaluation committee. Yet, knowing that Scout would be presenting what appeared to be stolen methodology added an unpredictable element that no amount of preparation could fully address.
Thinking about what we discussed last night, Ryan said as he set up our laptop and projection equipment, if Scout really has appropriated your methodology, this presentation gives us the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the depth of your knowledge versus her surface understanding. The evaluation committee will be able to tell the difference between someone who developed these techniques and someone who simply copied them. His optimism was reassuring, though I wondered if he fully grasped the complexity of the situation we were facing. Scout's practical experience in wilderness navigation was genuine and extensive. She could speak authoritatively about terrain features, wildlife behavior, and trail maintenance challenges. The question was whether she could explain the scientific principles underlying the methodology she claimed to have developed, or if her knowledge would prove superficial when subjected to detailed scrutiny. Derek and Scout arrived precisely at the scheduled time, accompanied by Jake Henderson, Summit Adventures marketing director. Scout carried herself with the confidence of someone who had navigated far more challenging terrain than a conference room presentation. Her outdoor gear was top quality, but worn, suggesting extensive field use rather than mere fashion statement. She nodded politely in my direction, showing no indication that she felt any discomfort about the situation or recognized the ethical implications of what she was attempting to accomplish. Derek maintained his usual charm offensive, working the room with practiced ease as he greeted each member of the evaluation committee. His ability to make instant personal connections had always been one of his strongest business assets, and I watched him deploy those skills strategically to create favorable impressions before Scout's presentation began. He introduced Scout as one of the most innovative environmental thinkers in the Pacific Northwest, a description that made my stomach clench with barely contained frustration. Michael Brooks called the session to order promptly at 9 o'clock, explaining the evaluation process and timeline. Each team would have 45 minutes for their presentation, followed by 30 minutes of questions from the committee. The presentations would be recorded for later review, and the committee would deliberate privately before announcing their decision by the end of the week. "We're looking for more than just technical competence," Brooks explained to both teams. "This contract requires genuine innovation in environmental assessment, deep understanding of Pacific Northwest ecosystems, and the ability to balance conservation priorities with recreational access. We want to see evidence of original thinking and practical experience that will serve the long-term interests of wilderness preservation." His emphasis on original thinking felt like validation of my concerns about Scout's appropriation of my methodology, though I realized it could equally apply to legitimate innovations she might have developed independently. The evaluation would ultimately depend on our ability to demonstrate the depth and authenticity of our respective approaches. Scout presented first, speaking with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to addressing groups in challenging environments. She began with a compelling overview of her wilderness experience, describing expeditions through some of the most remote and ecologically sensitive areas in North America. Her knowledge of terrain and wildlife was undeniably impressive, and she spoke passionately about the need to protect wilderness areas while accommodating the growing demand for outdoor recreation. Traditional environmental assessments focus on documenting existing conditions, Scout explained, advancing to a slide that made my blood run cold. My innovative approach incorporates predictive modeling that anticipates long-term ecological changes resulting from increased human presence. By analyzing wildlife migration patterns, soil composition data, and even the psychological responses of sensitive species to human activity, we can design trail systems that minimize environmental impact while maximizing recreational value. The slide displayed a flowchart that was virtually identical to diagrams I had created during the development of my methodology. The terminology, the analytical framework, even the specific sequence of assessment steps matched my original research with startling precision. Scout was presenting my intellectual property as her own breakthrough innovation, and she was doing it with remarkable poise and confidence. She continued with detailed explanations of data collection techniques, computer modeling applications, and field survey protocols that I recognized as direct adaptations of my original work. Her presentation materials included photographs of wildlife, terrain features, and trail conditions that Derek had clearly provided from his extensive archives. The combination of stolen methodology and authentic local knowledge created a compelling package that would be difficult for evaluators to distinguish from legitimate innovation. The most disturbing aspect of Scout's presentation was her apparent belief in the authenticity of her claims. She spoke about her methodology with genuine enthusiasm and conviction, as if she had forgotten the countless evenings when I had explained these concepts to her in detail. Either she had convinced herself that our collaborative discussions constituted joint development of ideas, or she possessed a level of calculated deception that I had never suspected. When Scout described the computer modeling software that formed the core of my analytical approach, I noticed subtle inaccuracies in her explanations that revealed her incomplete understanding of the underlying principles. She correctly identified the software applications and data sources, but stumbled slightly when describing the algorithms that weighted different environmental factors in the predictive models. These were precisely the technical details that distinguished my original research from conventional environmental assessment approaches. The evaluation committee asked probing questions about specific aspects of Scout's methodology, and her responses further confirmed my suspicions about the superficial nature of her knowledge. When asked about the mathematical foundations of her predictive modeling approach, she provided general explanations that sounded authoritative, but lacked the precision and depth that would be expected from someone who had actually developed these techniques. Michael Brooks inquired about the validation process Scout had used to test her methodology's accuracy, and her response revealed another significant gap in her understanding. She described field testing procedures that were logically sound, but differed substantially from
Rigorous validation protocols I had actually employed during my research. Her answers suggested she understood the need for validation, but had never actually conducted the systematic testing required to establish methodology reliability. Despite these technical shortcomings, Scout's presentation was undeniably effective. Her passion for wilderness preservation was genuine, her practical experience was extensive, and her communication skills were excellent. The evaluation committee appeared engaged and impressed by her vision for sustainable trail development. Unless they possessed the technical expertise to identify the gaps in her knowledge, her presentation would likely be viewed as innovative and compelling. Jake Henderson concluded their presentation with a polished summary of Summit Adventure's implementation capabilities and local partnerships. His marketing background was evident in the professional quality of their materials and the strategic emphasis on practical deliverables rather than theoretical concepts. The combination of Scout's apparent innovation and Derek's proven business track record created a formidable competitive package. As Scout's team concluded their presentation, I felt the weight of everything at stake pressing down on me. My turn to present would come after a brief recess, giving me just enough time to process what I had witnessed and finalize my strategy for responding. The evidence of appropriation was clear to me, but proving it to the evaluation committee would require careful presentation of technical details that demonstrated the depth of my knowledge versus Scout's surface understanding. Ryan squeezed my shoulder reassuringly as we gathered our materials during the break. Maya, you heard the same things I did. Her explanations were impressive on the surface, but she couldn't provide the kind of detailed technical information that someone who actually developed this methodology would know. You have the depth of knowledge that she's missing. His confidence was encouraging, though I wondered if the evaluation committee had noticed the same gaps that were obvious to us. Environmental assessment involved complex technical concepts that might not be familiar to generalist evaluators, even those with extensive experience in wilderness management. The committee's ability to distinguish between authentic innovation and sophisticated appropriation would ultimately determine the outcome of this competition. During the recess, I overheard fragments of conversation between committee members that suggested they had been genuinely impressed by Scout's presentation. One evaluator commented on the innovative integration of wildlife psychology into environmental assessment, while another praised the comprehensive approach to long-term impact prediction. Their positive responses confirmed that Scout's presentation had been effective,
regardless of the questionable origins of her methodology. Emma Collins arrived during the break, having driven up from Pine Ridge to provide moral support during my presentation. Her presence was a reminder that at least one person in our community understood the full scope of what was happening and would bear witness to whatever unfolded during the next hour. She had seen my original research develop from initial concepts through rigorous testing and refinement, giving her unique insight into the authenticity questions surrounding Scout's claims. "Maya, I watched Scout's presentation from the back of the room," Emma whispered as we prepared for the second session. "Everything she described sounded exactly like the work you've been developing for the past 3 years. The committee needs to understand that this isn't coincidence or parallel development. This is direct appropriation of your intellectual property." Her validation of my concerns provided the final motivation I needed to address the situation directly during my presentation. The evidence was clear, the stakes were enormous, and the opportunity for justice would not come again. Whatever the personal and professional consequences, I had to expose the truth about Scout's claims and defend the integrity of my original research. When the evaluation session resumed, Michael Brooks introduced my team with the same professional courtesy he had shown Scout's group. The formal equality of treatment belied the profound differences in what we would be presenting. Scout had offered stolen innovation, packaged with authentic local knowledge, while I would be defending original research while simultaneously exposing academic fraud. The contrast in our situations could not have been more stark. I began my presentation with a comprehensive overview of my educational background and research experience, establishing the technical knowledge that had enabled me to develop innovative approaches to environmental assessment. Unlike Scout's focus on practical wilderness experience, I emphasized the scientific rigor and theoretical framework that distinguished my methodology from conventional approaches in the field. Environmental assessment has traditionally been limited to documenting existing conditions at the time of survey, I explained, advancing to my first technical slide. My research over the past 3 years has focused on developing predictive modeling capabilities that can forecast long-term ecological changes with unprecedented accuracy. This methodology integrates multiple data sources and analytical techniques to create comprehensive impact projections that extend 20 years into the future. As I presented the detailed technical foundations of my methodology, I noticed subtle reactions from the evaluation committee that suggested they were beginning to appreciate the complexity and sophistication of my approach. Unlike Scout's presentation, which had focused primarily on general concepts and practical applications, mine delved into the mathematical models, data analysis protocols, and validation procedures that formed the scientific backbone of my research. The computer modeling software that formed the core of my analytical approach had required 18 months to develop and test. I explained the specific algorithms that weighted different environmental factors, the data integration protocols that allowed multiple sources to be analyzed simultaneously, and the validation procedures that had established the methodology's accuracy within 5% over extended time periods. These technical details represented the intellectual property that Scout had appropriated without understanding. When I described the field testing procedures that had validated my methodology's accuracy, I provided specific examples of predictions that had been confirmed through subsequent monitoring. Unlike Scout's vague references to validation, I could cite exact data from long-term monitoring protocols that demonstrated the accuracy of my predictive models.
Dates, locations, and measurement data that demonstrated the reliability of my approach. The evaluation committee took careful notes as I presented evidence of my methodology's proven effectiveness. The most critical moment in my presentation came when I addressed the question of methodology development and intellectual property. Rather than making direct accusations about Scout's appropriation, I focused on demonstrating the unique elements of my research that distinguished it from any existing approaches in the field.
I explained the specific insights that had led to breakthrough innovations, the iterative refinement process that had improved accuracy, and the original thinking that had enabled me to solve problems that had challenged environmental scientists for decades. The integration of wildlife psychology into environmental assessment represents a fundamental shift in how we understand human impact on wilderness ecosystems, I explained, advancing to slides that detailed this aspect of my research. Traditional approaches focus primarily on physical disruption, but my methodology recognizes that psychological stress responses in sensitive species can have ecological consequences that extend far beyond the immediate area of human activity. This particular innovation had emerged from my collaboration with Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, who had helped me understand the neurological and behavioral research that informed my approach to wildlife impact assessment. The concept had required extensive literature review, consultation with animal behavior specialists, and the development of new analytical frameworks that could incorporate psychological factors into predictive models. It was precisely the kind of complex, multidisciplinary innovation that could not be casually appropriated or superficially understood. As I continued my presentation, I provided increasingly detailed explanations of technical concepts that revealed the depth of knowledge required to actually develop and implement my methodology. Unlike Scout's general descriptions and occasional technical stumbles, I could explain every aspect of my research with the precision and authority that came from years of intensive development work. The evaluation committee's questions during my presentation were notably more technical and probing than those they had asked Scout. Michael Brooks inquired about specific mathematical models, validation statistics, and implementation protocols that required detailed technical knowledge to answer accurately. I responded with confidence and precision, providing the kind of comprehensive information that demonstrated authentic expertise rather than borrowed concepts. One committee member asked about the relationship between my methodology and existing environmental assessment standards, a question that allowed me to explain how my innovations built upon but substantially exceeded conventional approaches. I described the specific limitations of traditional methods that my research had addressed, the technical breakthroughs that had enabled improved accuracy, and the practical applications that made my methodology valuable for complex projects like the Whispering Pines expansion. When another evaluator asked about the development timeline for my methodology, I provided a detailed chronology that included specific milestones, research phases, and breakthrough moments that had shaped my approach. The 3-year development process had involved extensive collaboration with academic researchers, field testing in multiple environments, and iterative refinement based on real-world validation data. This kind of detailed development history could not be fabricated or appropriated. Ryan concluded our presentation with a comprehensive overview of our implementation plan for the Whispering Pines project, emphasizing how my methodology would be applied to specific challenges within the trail network. His presentation demonstrated our deep understanding of local conditions and our ability to translate innovative research into practical conservation outcomes. The combination of cutting-edge methodology and proven local expertise created a compelling case for our team's capabilities. As our presentation concluded, I felt cautiously optimistic about our performance. We had demonstrated both the technical sophistication of my methodology and our ability to implement it effectively for the National Park Service's needs. More importantly, the detailed technical information we had provided created a stark contrast with Scout's more superficial explanations, potentially exposing the gaps in her understanding that revealed the appropriated nature of her approach. The evaluation committee's final questions focused on long-term monitoring and adaptive management strategies, topics that required deep understanding of both environmental science and practical implementation challenges. My responses drew upon years of research experience and demonstrated the kind of systematic thinking that had enabled me to develop innovative solutions to complex environmental problems. During the question period, Michael Brooks asked both teams to return to the conference room for a brief comparative discussion of their approaches. This unexpected addition to the evaluation process created an opportunity for direct comparison between Scout's appropriated methodology and my original research. The prospect of side-by-side analysis filled me with both anticipation and anxiety, knowing that this final phase could definitively expose the truth about Scout's claims. As both teams reassembled in the conference room, the atmosphere was noticeably tense. Scout maintained her confident demeanor, but I noticed subtle signs of discomfort that suggested she recognized the potential danger of direct comparison with my presentation. Derek's usual charm seemed forced, and Jake Henderson appeared focused on damage control rather than promotion of their team's capabilities. The evaluation committee's comparative questions began innocuously enough, asking both teams to explain specific aspects of their methodologies in greater detail. However, as the questions became more technical and specific, the differences between Scout's surface knowledge and my deep expertise became increasingly apparent. When asked to explain the mathematical foundations of predictive modeling algorithms, Scout provided general descriptions, while I offered precise technical specifications that revealed intimate familiarity with every aspect of the analytical process. Michael Brooks asked both teams to describe their validation procedures in detail, and the contrast in our responses was striking. Scout's description focused on general field testing concepts without specific protocols or measurable outcomes, while I provided comprehensive validation data, including statistical analysis, accuracy metrics, and model comparisons.
Measurements and peer-review documentation. The difference between theoretical understanding and practical implementation could not have been more obvious. The final comparative question addressed intellectual property and methodology development, creating the opening I had been hoping for throughout the evaluation process. Rather than making direct accusations about appropriation, I focused on demonstrating the originality and depth of my research through detailed explanations of breakthrough insights, development challenges, and innovative solutions that had shaped my methodology over 3 years of intensive work. When Scout attempted to respond with similar claims about her development process, the gaps in her knowledge became impossible to ignore. She could not explain specific research phases, breakthrough moments, or the iterative refinement process that had characterized authentic methodology development. Her descriptions remained general and theoretical, lacking the concrete details that would accompany genuine innovation. As the comparative session concluded, I felt confident that the evaluation committee had witnessed clear evidence of the appropriation underlying Scout's claims. The contrast between surface familiarity and deep expertise had been demonstrated repeatedly through technical questions that exposed the limitations of borrowed knowledge. Whatever the final outcome of the contract award, the truth about methodology ownership had been established through direct comparison. Parts 6 through 9. The strategic revelation. The tension in the Trailhead Lodge conference room was palpable as Michael Brooks concluded the comparative questioning session. I could see the evaluation committee exchanging meaningful glances, their expressions suggesting they had noticed the significant disparities between Scout's general explanations and my detailed technical responses. However, I realized that subtle implications might not be sufficient to expose the full scope of what had occurred. The moment had come for direct action. Dr. Patricia Rodriguez arrived at the lodge just as the formal evaluation session was concluding, her timing impeccable for what I had planned as the decisive phase of this confrontation. At 58, Pat commanded respect throughout the environmental science community, her silver hair and sharp intelligence making her a formidable presence in any professional setting. She carried a leather briefcase that I knew contained documentation that would prove, beyond any doubt, the timeline and authenticity of my methodology development. "Maya, I apologize for arriving late," Pat announced as she entered the conference room, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the most respected environmental scientists in the Pacific Northwest. "I was reviewing some historical documents that I believe will be relevant to today's evaluation process." Michael Brooks looked confused by this unexpected addition to the proceedings, but his respect for Pat's reputation was evident in his deferential greeting. "Dr. Rodriguez, we weren't expecting additional participants in today's evaluation.
Is there something specific you need to address with the committee? Pat's smile was gracious but determined as she set her briefcase on the conference table. Actually, Mr. Brooks, there are some intellectual property concerns related to today's presentations that I believe the National Park Service should be aware of before making any contractual commitments. These concerns involve the authenticity and ownership of certain methodologies that have been presented today. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, immediately shifting the atmosphere in the room from professional evaluation to potential legal crisis. Scout's confident expression faltered for the first time since her presentation began, while Derek's face went pale as he realized the implications of Pat's statement. Jake Henderson began frantically taking notes. His marketing instincts recognized a public relations disaster in the making. Dr. Rodriguez, Brooks said carefully, "These are serious allegations. Before we proceed, I need to understand exactly what concerns you're raising and what evidence you have to support them." Pat opened her briefcase with deliberate precision, removing a thick folder of documents that I recognized as the complete historical record of my methodology development. Mr. Brooks, I have served as Maya Chen's research mentor for the past 4 years, guiding her development of innovative trail impact assessment techniques. I have documentation spanning 3 years that establishes the timeline, development process, and intellectual property ownership of the methodology that has been presented by both teams today. She placed the first document on the table, a research proposal dated 18 months earlier that outlined my initial concepts for predictive environmental modeling. This is Maya's original research proposal, submitted to the Pacific Northwest Environmental Research Foundation in March of last year. As you can see, it details the specific innovations that form the core of her trail impact assessment methodology. The document was stamped with official foundation seals and bore Pat's signature as supervising researcher, establishing its authenticity beyond question. More importantly, it predated any potential claims Scout might make about independent development of similar techniques by more than a year. Brooks examined the document carefully, his expression growing increasingly serious as he absorbed its implications. Dr. Rodriguez, are you suggesting that one of the presentations we heard today involved plagiarized material? I'm not suggesting anything, Mr. Brooks, Pat replied with scientific precision. I'm documenting the factual timeline of methodology development and allowing you to draw your own conclusions about the authenticity of today's presentations. She continued placing documents on the table with methodical thoroughness, each one establishing another element of my research chronology: correspondence with academic collaborators, peer review comments, field testing reports, and validation studies created an irrefutable record of genuine innovation developed over years of intensive work. Scout finally found her voice, though it lacked the confidence that had characterized her earlier presentation. Dr. Rodriguez, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I developed my assessment techniques through my own field experience and research. Any similarities to other methodologies are purely coincidental. Pat's response was swift and devastating. Ms. Williams, coincidence would not explain why your presentation today included specific technical terminology that Maya coined during her research, algorithms that she developed in consultation with computer modeling specialists, or validation procedures that she designed for her particular analytical framework.
Briefcase, Pat produced transcripts of recorded conversations from academic conferences where I had presented preliminary findings about my methodology. The transcripts included questions and answers that demonstrated my deep understanding of the research, along with timestamps that established my public presentation of these innovations months before Scout claimed to have developed them independently. Furthermore, Pat continued, Maya's methodology incorporates insights from collaborative research with Dr. Sarah Martinez at the University of Washington's Wildlife Behavior Laboratory. Dr. Martinez has confirmed that her collaboration with Maya on wildlife psychology applications began 14 months ago, well before any other researcher had approached her about similar work. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable, but Pat was far from finished. She produced email correspondence between myself and various software developers who had helped create the computer modeling applications that formed the analytical core of my methodology. The emails included detailed technical specifications, algorithm requirements, and testing protocols that I had designed specifically for my research needs. These emails document Maya's collaboration with TechFlow Solutions to develop custom analytical software for her environmental assessment methodology, Pat explained to the increasingly uncomfortable evaluation committee. The software specifications include proprietary algorithms that Maya designed to weight environmental factors according to her theoretical framework. Ms. Williams' presentation today described this exact software and these specific algorithms as components of her own methodology. Derek attempted to interject, his desperation becoming evident as the scope of the appropriation was revealed. Dr. Rodriguez, Scouts spent countless hours discussing environmental issues with Maya and me. Perhaps some cross-pollination of ideas occurred during those conversations, but that doesn't constitute plagiarism. Pat's smile was coldly professional as she addressed Derek's weak defense. Mr. Martinez, cross-pollination implies mutual exchange and collaborative development. What occurred here was the systematic appropriation of proprietary research through social interactions that Maya believed were informal educational discussions. Ms. Williams had no academic credentials, research background, or intellectual contributions that would justify claiming ownership of Maya's innovations. The most damning evidence came in Pat's final document, a detailed comparison between my original research papers and the technical specifications that Scout had submitted as part of her proposal to the National Park Service. The comparison revealed not just conceptual similarities, but identical mathematical formulations, data analysis protocols, and even specific terminology that I had invented during my research. This comparative analysis demonstrates that Ms. Williams' methodology is not merely similar to Maya's work, Pat announced to the stunned evaluation committee. It is identical in every significant technical aspect. The probability of independent development of identical innovations is statistically impossible. Michael Brooks appeared shaken as he reviewed the evidence that Pat had systematically presented. The National Park Service's reputation for ethical contracting was at stake, and the prospect of awarding a major contract based on plagiarized research created serious legal and professional liability issues. Dr. Rodriguez, this is an extremely serious situation, Brooks said slowly. If your documentation is accurate, then we're dealing with intellectual property theft on a scale that could have significant legal ramifications. I need to suspend this evaluation process until we can thoroughly investigate these allegations. Scout's facade of confidence finally cracked completely as she realized the hopelessness of her position. Mr. Brooks, I think there's been a misunderstanding about how my methodology developed. Perhaps Maya and I should discuss this privately to clarify any confusion about our respective contributions. The suggestion was pathetic in its transparency, but it provided me with the opening I had been waiting for throughout this entire confrontation. Scout, there's no confusion about contributions or development. You systematically appropriated 3 years of my original research and presented it as your own innovation. The evidence Dr. Rodriguez has presented establishes that timeline beyond any reasonable doubt. I stood and walked to the document display that Pat had created, pointing to specific elements that demonstrated the scope of Scout's theft. These aren't similar ideas that developed independently. These are identical formulations, algorithms, and procedures that you learned about through social conversations during my relationship with Derek. You took advantage of my trust and generosity to steal intellectual property that represents years of my professional life. The accusation hung in the air with devastating finality, supported by irrefutable documentation, and delivered with the moral authority of someone defending legitimate intellectual property rights. Scout's response was barely audible, her previous confidence replaced by obvious recognition of her untenable position. Derek made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation, his charm offensive shifting into damage control mode. Maya, I think we can work this out between us without involving the National Park Service in what's essentially a personal disagreement. Perhaps we can find a collaborative arrangement that recognizes everyone's contributions. The suggestion was insulting in its assumption that stolen intellectual property could be resolved through negotiation rather than justice. My response was immediate and uncompromising. Derek, this isn't a personal disagreement or a collaborative opportunity. This is intellectual property theft that undermines the integrity of environmental research and threatens the credibility of legitimate innovation in our field. Brooks intervened before the confrontation could escalate further, his professional training taking precedence over personal relationships. I am terminating this evaluation process immediately pending a complete investigation of these intellectual property allegations. The National Park Service cannot proceed with contract award until these issues are resolved through appropriate legal channels. Pat gathered her documentation with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully defended academic integrity against fraudulent appropriation. Mr. Brooks, I appreciate the National Park Service's commitment to ethical contracting. Maya's research represents genuine innovation that deserves protection from unauthorized appropriation.
Committee filed out of the conference room. Their expressions reflected the serious implications of what they had witnessed. What had begun as a routine contract evaluation had become a documented case of intellectual property theft with potential legal ramifications for all parties involved. Scout and Derek conferred quietly in the corner of the room, their conversation undoubtedly focused on damage control and exit strategies. Jake Henderson packed their presentation materials with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing public relations crises, though this situation clearly exceeded his usual expertise. Emma approached me as the room began to empty, her expression reflecting both relief and admiration for how the confrontation had unfolded. Maya, I can't believe you kept your composure through all of that. Watching Scout try to defend the indefensible was painful, but you handled it with complete professionalism. The aftermath of the confrontation felt surreal, as if the intensity of the preceding hours had compressed time and left reality slightly out of focus. Pat's intervention had been more decisive than I had dared hope, her documentation providing irrefutable proof that completely vindicated my position while exposing the full scope of Scout's appropriation. Ryan joined our small group, his excitement barely contained as he processed the implications of what had just occurred. Maya, this changes everything. Not only have we protected your intellectual property, but we've established your credibility as a genuine innovator in environmental assessment. When word of this gets out, it will enhance rather than damage your professional reputation. The vindication felt profound, but I realized that the true victory lay not in exposing Scout's theft, but in defending the integrity of environmental research against fraudulent appropriation. The methodology I had developed could now be implemented for its intended purpose of wilderness preservation rather than being hijacked for someone else's career advancement. Dr. Rodriguez packed her briefcase with the systematic precision that characterized all her professional activities. Maya, I want you to understand that what happened here today extends beyond personal vindication. Academic integrity in environmental science depends on protecting legitimate research from appropriation. Your willingness to confront this situation directly has helped preserve the credibility of innovation in our field. Her words provided perspective on the broader implications of the confrontation, reminding me that intellectual property theft undermined not just individual researchers, but the entire scientific process that depended on original thinking and authentic innovation. As we prepared to leave the Trailhead Lodge, Michael Brooks approached me with obvious respect for how I had handled an extremely difficult situation. Maya, I want you to know that the National Park Service will be conducting a complete review of this situation to ensure that our contracting processes aren't vulnerable to similar problems in the future. Your research methodology appears to be exactly what we need for the Whispering Pines project, and we'll be in touch once the legal issues are resolved. His statement provided hope that justice would extend beyond mere exposure of Scout's theft to actual recognition and implementation of my legitimate innovations. The contract that had seemed lost to fraudulent appropriation might still be recoverable through proper legal channels. The drive back to Pine Ridge passed in contemplative silence, each of us processing the dramatic events of the morning in our own way.
Emma drove while Ryan and I reviewed the documentation that Pat had provided, marveling at the thoroughness of her evidence and the devastating effectiveness of her presentation. The mountain scenery that surrounded us seemed more beautiful than usual, as if the resolution of the confrontation had restored my ability to appreciate the wilderness that my research was designed to protect. The irony was not lost on me that Scout's attempted theft of my methodology had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened my position in the environmental consulting community in Cascade Valley. When we arrived at the Green Path office, I found several messages from colleagues who had already heard about the morning's events through the tight-knit network of environmental professionals in Cascade Valley. The news of Scout's exposed plagiarism was spreading quickly, but the response was uniformly supportive of my position and critical of the attempted appropriation. Dr. Sarah Martinez from the University of Washington had left a particularly encouraging message, offering to provide additional documentation of our collaborative research if needed for any legal proceedings. Her support reinforced Pat's point about the broader implications of defending academic integrity against fraudulent appropriation. As we prepared to leave the Trailhead Lodge, Michael Brooks approached me with obvious respect for how I had handled an extremely difficult situation. Maya, I want you to know that the National Park Service will be conducting a complete review of this situation to ensure that our contracting processes aren't vulnerable to similar problems in the future. Your research methodology appears to be exactly what we need for the Whispering Pines project, and we'll be in touch once the legal issues are resolved. His statement provided hope that justice would extend beyond mere exposure of Scout's theft to actual recognition and implementation of my legitimate innovations. The contract that had seemed lost to fraudulent appropriation might still be recoverable through proper legal channels. The drive back to Pine Ridge passed in contemplative silence, each of us processing the dramatic events of the morning in our own way. Emma drove while Ryan and I reviewed the documentation that Pat had provided, marveling at the thoroughness of her evidence and the devastating effectiveness of her presentation. The mountain scenery that surrounded us seemed more beautiful than usual, as if the resolution of the confrontation had restored my ability to appreciate the wilderness that my research was designed to protect. The irony was not lost on me that Scout's attempted theft of my methodology had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened my position in the environmental consulting community. When we arrived at the Green Path office, I found several messages from colleagues who had already heard about the morning's events through the tight-knit network of environmental professionals in Cascade Valley. The news of Scout's exposed plagiarism was spreading quickly, but the response was uniformly supportive of my position and critical of the attempted appropriation. Dr. Sarah Martinez from the University of Washington had left a particularly encouraging message, offering to provide additional documentation of our collaborative research if needed for any legal proceedings. Her support reinforced Pat's point about the broader implications of defending academic integrity against fraudulent appropriation. As the afternoon progressed, the full scope of the vindication became apparent. Not only had Scout's theft been exposed and her credibility destroyed, but my own reputation had been enhanced through the demonstration of authentic innovation and principled defense of intellectual property rights. The methodology that I had developed through years of intensive research would now be implemented for its intended purpose of environmental protection. The personal satisfaction of exposing Scout's appropriation was significant, but the professional validation felt even more meaningful. The environmental consulting community in Cascade Valley now understood that I was not just another recent graduate trying to establish credibility, but a genuine innovator whose research contributed substantially to the field of wilderness preservation. That evening, as I sat in my riverside cabin reviewing the events of the day, I reflected on the journey that had led from Derek's betrayal of trust to Scout's exposure as a fraud. The experience had been painful and professionally dangerous, but it had ultimately demonstrated the value of authentic innovation and the importance of defending intellectual property rights in academic and professional contexts. The methodology that Scout had tried to steal would now be applied to protecting the Whispering Pines Trail Network, ensuring that one of the Pacific Northwest's most precious wilderness areas would be preserved for future generations through scientifically sound environmental assessment. The irony that her attempted theft had ultimately strengthened my position in implementing genuine conservation solutions provided a satisfying conclusion to an extraordinarily challenging confrontation. The phone rang as darkness fell over Cascade Valley, interrupting my contemplation of the day's events. Michael Brooks's voice carried obvious relief as he delivered news that validated everything I had hoped would result from exposing Scout's plagiarism. Maya, I wanted to call
Personally, to inform you that the National Park Service has completed its preliminary review of today's events. Based on Dr. Rodriguez's documentation and our own investigation, we're prepared to move forward with contract award to GreenPath Environmental Consulting, pending final resolution of the intellectual property issues. The words provided the professional vindication that made the entire confrontation worthwhile, confirming that justice extended beyond mere exposure of wrongdoing to actual recognition and implementation of legitimate innovation. My methodology would be used for its intended purpose of wilderness preservation, rather than being hijacked for fraudulent career advancement. Furthermore, Brooks continued, the National Park Service will be implementing new procedures to verify the authenticity and ownership of methodologies presented in contract competitions. What happened today has highlighted vulnerabilities in our evaluation process that need to be addressed to prevent similar situations. His commitment to systemic improvements provided hope that other researchers would be protected from the kind of intellectual property theft that Stout had attempted. The confrontation had served not just personal justice, but broader professional integrity in environmental consulting. As I ended the call and returned to contemplating the evening mountain landscape, I felt a profound sense of completion that extended beyond mere professional success. The methodology I had developed through years of intensive research would now contribute to preserving wilderness areas that had inspired my commitment to environmental science in the first place. The attempted theft had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened my position in the environmental consulting community, demonstrating both the value of authentic innovation and the importance of defending intellectual property rights against fraudulent appropriation. Scout's exposure as a plagiarist had vindicated my decision to confront the situation directly, rather than allowing the theft to proceed unchallenged. The final resolution. The weeks following the confrontation at Trailhead Lodge transformed the entire landscape of environmental consulting in Cascade Valley. Word of Scout's exposed plagiarism spread through the tight-knit outdoor community with the speed of wildfire, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate participants in the National Park Service evaluation. Emma had been right when she predicted that confronting the theft directly would enhance rather than damage my professional reputation. But even she hadn't anticipated the scope of positive changes that would emerge from the crisis. Dr. Patricia Rodriguez called 3 days after the evaluation to inform me that the Pacific Northwest Environmental Research Foundation wanted to feature my methodology development as a case study in their annual symposium on innovation in wilderness preservation. The Foundation's interest represented not just professional recognition, but validation from the broader scientific community that my research constituted genuine breakthrough innovation worthy of widespread implementation. Maya, what happened at Trailhead Lodge has resonated throughout the environmental science community, Pat explained during our phone conversation. The Foundation Board was impressed not just by your technical innovations, but by your principled defense of intellectual property rights. They want to use your experience as an example of how legitimate research should be protected and promoted. The Foundation's invitation to present my work at their symposium represented the kind of professional platform that typically took years to achieve, accelerated by the dramatic circumstances of exposing Scout's appropriation. More importantly, it provided an opportunity to share my methodology with researchers and practitioners who could adapt and refine it for environmental challenges throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Michael Brooks contacted me personally to schedule a formal contract signing ceremony for the Whispering Pines Trail expansion project. The National Park Service had completed their investigation of the intellectual property issues and determined that GreenPath Environmental Consulting should receive the full contract without any lingering concerns about methodology ownership or authenticity. Maya, I want you to know that this situation has prompted significant changes in our evaluation procedures.
The National Park Service is implementing new protocols to verify the authenticity and ownership of methodologies presented in contract competitions. Your experience has helped us identify vulnerabilities that could have led to similar problems in future projects. The systemic improvements that Brooks described provided satisfying evidence that the confrontation had served broader purposes beyond personal vindication. Other researchers would be protected from intellectual property theft through enhanced verification procedures, while the National Park Service would be shielded from the legal and ethical complications of contracting with plagiarists. Ryan's excitement about our newfound professional status was infectious, his natural optimism amplified by the sudden transformation of our struggling consulting firm into a recognized innovator in environmental assessment. The $3.7 million contract would provide financial stability for years while establishing our reputation as leaders in sustainable trail development. Maya, this is just the beginning, Ryan insisted as we reviewed implementation plans for the Whispering Pines project. Once word spreads about the effectiveness of your methodology, we'll have consulting opportunities throughout the region. The National Park Service contract will serve as proof of concept for potential clients who want cutting-edge environmental assessment capabilities. His prediction proved remarkably accurate. Within 2 weeks of the contract announcement, GreenPath had received inquiries from 3 other government agencies and 2 private conservation organizations interested in applying my methodology to their own projects. The attempted theft that had threatened to destroy my career had instead catalyzed professional success beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. The most unexpected development came from Derek himself, who requested a private meeting to discuss what he described as mutual professional interests in sustainable tourism development. His message, delivered through Emma to avoid any appearance of inappropriate personal contact, suggested that he wanted to explore legitimate collaboration opportunities that might salvage his business relationships in the environmental consulting community. I agreed to meet Derek at Mountain View Coffee House, the neutral territory providing appropriate setting for what I expected would be an awkward attempt at damage control. His appearance reflected the stress of recent events, his usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious discomfort and what appeared to be genuine remorse about the situation that had developed. Maya, I want to start by acknowledging that I completely mishandled the situation with the Scouts' research claims. Derek began without his characteristic preliminary charm offensive. I should have recognized that her methodology was too sophisticated and detailed to have been developed independently, especially given her limited technical background. His admission represented more accountability than I had expected, though I remained skeptical about his motivations for requesting this meeting. Derek's business survival depended on maintaining relationships within Cascade Valley's environmental community, and association with plagiarism could prove commercially devastating for Summit Adventures. Derek, I appreciate your acknowledgement, but I'm curious about why you're bringing this up now, I replied carefully. The situation has been resolved through appropriate professional channels, and I don't see any benefit in relitigating past decisions. Derek leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine earnestness, his usual calculated charm replaced by straightforward honesty. That was more compelling than his typical presentation style. Maya, I'm not trying to relitigate anything or make excuses for what happened. I'm here because I've realized that my business model needs to evolve if I want to remain relevant in the changing outdoor recreation industry. He explained that the exposure of Scouts' plagiarism had prompted serious reflection about Summit Adventures' approach to environmental stewardship and sustainable tourism. The company's focus on immediate client experiences without consideration of long-term ecological impact had become professionally embarrassing in light of current conservation priorities. The truth is, Maya, I need legitimate environmental expertise to transform Summit Adventures into the kind of responsible outdoor recreation business that can thrive in the current regulatory environment. Derek continued that your methodology represents exactly the kind of scientific rigor that my business has been lacking. The proposal he outlined involved Summit Adventures contracting with GreenPath for ongoing environmental assessment and monitoring services, creating a partnership that would enhance both companies' capabilities while ensuring that outdoor recreation activities remained within sustainable ecological limits. The arrangement would provide steady revenue for our consulting firm while giving Derek's business credible environmental credentials. I know I have no right to ask for your professional collaboration after what happened, Derek acknowledged, but I'm hoping that we can separate business opportunities from personal history in ways that benefit both our companies and the wilderness areas we're trying to protect. His proposal was professionally sound and potentially lucrative, but I needed time to consider the emotional implications of working closely with someone whose personal betrayal had nearly enabled the destruction of my career. The financial benefits were significant, but maintaining professional boundaries with Derek would require careful management to avoid recreating the personal dynamics that had led to the original problems. Emma's perspective proved invaluable when I discussed Derek's proposal with her that evening. Her outsider's view of the situation helped clarify the distinction between personal forgiveness and professional collaboration, providing framework for evaluating the opportunity on purely business terms. Maya, you don't have to like Derek or trust him personally to work with him professionally, Emma pointed out with characteristic directness. If the partnership makes business sense and includes appropriate legal protections for your intellectual property, then your personal feelings about his past behavior shouldn't prevent you from pursuing profitable opportunities. Her advice resonated with my own inclinations toward pragmatic decision-making based on professional rather than emotional considerations. Derek's proposal offered genuine business advantages, and refusing it purely from personal resentment would represent the kind of counterproductive thinking that had nearly allowed Scout's theft to proceed unchallenged. Dr. Rodriguez provided additional perspective when I consulted her about the ethical implications of working with Derek after his role in the plagiarism situation. Her academic background gave her unique insight into the complex relationships between personal trust and professional collaboration in research environments. Maya, the scientific community regularly involves collaborations between researchers who have personal differences or past conflicts. What matters is maintaining professional standards and protecting intellectual property through appropriate legal frameworks. If Derek's proposal includes those protections, then personal history shouldn't prevent productive partnerships. Her guidance helped me recognize that refusing potentially beneficial collaboration purely from personal considerations would represent a form of emotional decision-making that contradicted the rational, evidence-based approach that characterized my professional methodology. Derek's past behavior was relevant only insofar as it informed current risk assessment and contractual protections. I agreed to move forward with Derek's proposal, but insisted on comprehensive legal documentation that would protect my intellectual property while clearly defining the scope and limitations of any collaborative activities. The contract we ultimately developed included specific clauses preventing unauthorized disclosure of proprietary methodologies, requiring written approval for any presentation of collaborative work, and establishing clear ownership boundaries for future innovations. The partnership with Summit Adventures proved immediately successful, providing GreenPath with steady consulting revenue while giving Derek's business the environmental credibility necessary to compete for high-end outdoor recreation contracts. More importantly, the collaboration demonstrated that professional relationships could be rebuilt on foundations of mutual benefit and legal protection, even after significant personal betrayal. Scout's situation provided a cautionary contrast to Derek's successful rehabilitation within the environmental community. Her exposure as a plagiarist had effectively ended any prospects for legitimate consulting work in Cascade Valley, forcing her to relocate and initiate a new career in business administration far removed from her academic background. Her case served as a sobering reminder that the consequences of unethical behavior could be irreversible, regardless of subsequent efforts at restoration or rehabilitation.
Relocate to another region where her reputation might be salvageable. The severity of consequences for intellectual property theft sent clear messages throughout the outdoor recreation industry about the importance of maintaining ethical standards. Jake Henderson had managed to distance Summit Adventures from Scout's disgrace through strategic public relations efforts that emphasized Derek's commitment to legitimate environmental partnerships. His marketing background proved valuable in repositioning the company as a reformed organization dedicated to sustainable practices rather than opportunistic exploitation of others' innovations. The National Park Service contract implementation proceeded smoothly, with my methodology proving even more effective than anticipated in predicting and mitigating environmental impacts from the Whispering Pines Trail expansion. The project served as a demonstration site for sustainable trail development techniques, attracting attention from park services and conservation organizations throughout North America. 6 months after the confrontation at Trailhead Lodge, I found myself presenting my methodology to an international symposium on wilderness preservation, sharing the stage with renowned environmental scientists whose work I had studied during graduate school. The professional recognition represented validation beyond anything I had imagined when I first began developing innovative approaches to trail impact assessment. The symposium presentation generated consulting inquiries from organizations in Europe and Australia, expanding GreenPath's potential market far beyond the Pacific Northwest. Ryan's vision of our small firm becoming a recognized leader in environmental consulting was materializing more rapidly than either of us had dared hope when we started the business in Pine Ridge. Emma documented the symposium presentation for our company's marketing materials, her graphic design skills helping translate complex scientific concepts into accessible visual formats that communicated our capabilities to potential clients. Her friendship and professional support had been instrumental throughout the crisis and subsequent success, providing perspective and encouragement when both were desperately needed. Dr. Rodriguez served as my co-presenter at the symposium, her established reputation lending additional credibility to my innovations, while her mentorship continued to guide my professional development. The collaboration demonstrated the positive outcomes possible when senior researchers invest in supporting junior colleagues rather than competing with or exploiting them. The most satisfying aspect of the professional transformation was the opportunity to implement my methodology for its intended purpose of wilderness preservation. The Whispering Pines Trail Expansion Project had become a model for sustainable outdoor recreation development, balancing conservation priorities with public access in ways that protected ecological integrity while accommodating growing demand for wilderness experiences. Michael Brooks invited me to join a National Park Service Advisory Committee on innovative environmental assessment techniques, providing ongoing opportunities to influence policy development and share expertise with conservation professionals throughout the federal system. The appointment represented recognition of my expertise at the highest levels of environmental management. The advisory committee work connected me with researchers and practitioners working on similar challenges in diverse ecosystems, creating collaborative networks that enhanced my understanding of environmental assessment applications beyond trail development. The intellectual stimulation and professional growth opportunities exceeded anything available through purely commercial consulting work. As autumn arrived in Cascade Valley, painting the mountainsides in brilliant oranges and golds, I reflected on the transformative year that had begun with Derek's betrayal and Scout's theft, but culminated in professional recognition and meaningful conservation work. The attempted appropriation of my intellectual property had ultimately catalyzed career advancement that might have taken decades to achieve through conventional paths. The riverside cabin that served as my home had become a retreat where I could develop new innovations in environmental assessment while remaining connected to the wilderness that inspired my commitment to conservation. The setting provided perfect balance between intellectual challenge and natural beauty, supporting both creative thinking and personal renewal. Ryan and I celebrated our company's transformation from struggling startup to recognized leader in environmental consulting, but we maintained focus on the conservation goals that had motivated our original partnership. Financial success provided tools for more effective environmental protection rather than ends in themselves.
The partnership with Derek's Summit Adventures had evolved into a productive collaboration that demonstrated professional relationships could transcend personal history when built on mutual benefit and appropriate legal protections. Our working relationship remained strictly professional, but it had become genuinely effective in advancing both environmental protection and sustainable tourism development. Scout's absence from the environmental consulting community served as a reminder of the consequences of intellectual property theft, but I took no satisfaction in her professional destruction. The situation had been resolved through exposure of the truth rather than vindictive punishment, allowing justice to emerge from factual documentation rather than personal retaliation. The methodology that Scout had tried to steal was now being applied to wilderness preservation projects throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond, fulfilling its intended purpose of protecting ecosystems while accommodating human recreation needs. The irony that her attempted theft had ultimately accelerated legitimate implementation of the innovations provided fitting conclusion to the crisis. Dr. Rodriguez continued serving as my mentor and collaborator, her guidance helping me navigate the complex professional landscape of environmental consulting while maintaining focus on scientific rigor and ethical standards. Her intervention during the Trailhead Lodge confrontation had been decisive in exposing Scout's plagiarism and protecting my intellectual property rights. Emma's friendship remained one of the most valuable constants in my transformed professional life. Her perspective and support provided stability during rapid changes and new challenges. Her graphic design work had become integral to GreenPath's marketing efforts, creating visual presentations that effectively communicated our technical capabilities.
Capabilities to diverse audiences. The National Park Service contract had exceeded all expectations in demonstrating the effectiveness of my methodology, leading to additional projects and ongoing relationships that would sustain our business for years to come. The Whispering Pines Trail expansion had become a showcase for sustainable outdoor recreation development, attracting visitors and researchers from around the world. As winter approached Cascade Valley, bringing the first snows to the high peaks visible from my cabin windows, I felt profound gratitude for the unexpected path that had led from crisis to triumph. The confrontation that had seemed likely to destroy my career had instead catalyzed professional success beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. The methodology I had developed through years of intensive research was now contributing to wilderness preservation efforts throughout North America and beyond, fulfilling the conservation goals that had motivated my commitment to environmental science. The attempted theft had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened my position in the scientific community. The experience had taught valuable lessons about protecting intellectual property, maintaining professional relationships, and defending principles under pressure. These lessons would guide future decisions and help prevent similar crises while supporting continued innovation in environmental assessment and wilderness preservation. The story that had begun with Scout's betrayal and Derek's complicity had evolved into a testament to the power of authentic innovation, principled confrontation, and strategic collaboration. The professional recognition and conservation impact that resulted demonstrated that defending intellectual property rights served broader purposes beyond personal vindication. 2 years had passed since the confrontation at Trailhead Lodge, and the transformation of my professional life continued to unfold in ways that exceeded every expectation I had harbored during those dark months when Scout's theft threatened to derail my career. Standing in the executive conference room of the newly opened GreenPath Environmental Institute, I gazed out at the snow-capped peaks of Cascade Valley while preparing for a video conference with conservation leaders from 5 continents who wanted to implement my methodology in their own wilderness preservation projects. The Institute represented the culmination of everything that had emerged from exposing Scout's plagiarism and defending my intellectual property. What had begun as a small consulting firm operating from a converted cabin had evolved into an internationally recognized center for environmental innovation, attracting researchers, practitioners,
and policymakers from around the world who sought to understand and apply cutting-edge approaches to ecosystem protection. Dr. Patricia Rodriguez entered the conference room carrying the morning's correspondence, her role having expanded from mentor to co-director of research operations as our organization grew beyond anything we had initially envisioned. Her decision to leave the university and join GreenPath full-time had provided the academic credibility and administrative expertise necessary to manage our transformation into a legitimate research institution. Maya, the response to yesterday's webinar on predictive impact modeling has been extraordinary, Pat announced as she reviewed the international inquiries that had arrived overnight. We have requests for methodology training from park services in 12 countries. 3 universities want to establish formal research partnerships, and the United Nations Environmental Program is asking about adapting your approach for global conservation initiatives. The scope of international interest reflected how far my original research had traveled from its origins in analyzing trail impacts in Pacific Northwest wilderness areas. The methodology that Scout had tried to appropriate for a relatively modest National Park Service contract was now being considered for application to conservation challenges spanning from Amazon rainforest preservation to Arctic wildlife protection. Ryan Thompson knocked on the conference room door before entering with news that would have seemed impossible during our early struggles to establish credibility in Cascade Valley's environmental consulting community. His excitement was barely contained as he shared the morning's most significant development. Maya, I just received confirmation from the MacArthur Foundation, Ryan announced with a grin that stretched across his entire face. They're awarding you a fellowship for pioneering work in environmental assessment methodology. The announcement will be made next week, but they wanted to give you advance notice so you could prepare for the media attention. The MacArthur Fellowship represented recognition at the highest levels of intellectual achievement, validating not just my technical innovations, but the broader significance of my approach to balancing conservation priorities with human recreation needs. The fellowship would provide 5 years of unrestricted funding for continued research, while establishing my credibility among the most accomplished innovators in environmental science. Pat's expression reflected the pride of a mentor whose protege had achieved recognition that exceeded even her own considerable accomplishments. Maya, this fellowship will give you the platform and resources to expand your methodology beyond anything we've been able to accomplish through consulting contracts alone. The MacArthur recognition will open doors to collaborations and projects that were previously unimaginable. The irony was not lost on me that Scout's attempted theft had catalyzed the very success she had hoped to achieve through appropriating my work. Her exposure as a plagiarist had accelerated my rise to international prominence while simultaneously destroying any possibility of her own professional advancement in environmental consulting. Emma Collins arrived for our scheduled strategy session about expanding GreenPath's educational programs, her graphic design business having grown alongside our institute through her role in creating visual materials that translated complex environmental concepts into accessible formats for diverse audiences. Her friendship had remained constant throughout the dramatic changes of the past 2 years, providing personal stability during professional transformation. Maya, the preliminary enrollment numbers for next year's training programs are incredible, Emma reported as she spread marketing materials across the conference table. We have applications from 37 countries for the Advanced Methodology Certification Program, and the waiting list for the Wilderness Assessment Program is already filling fast.
Workshop extends 18 months into the future. The educational programs had emerged organically from the international demand for training in my methodology, creating sustainable revenue streams while ensuring that environmental assessment innovations would be properly implemented rather than superficially copied. The rigorous certification process provided protection against the kind of inappropriate appropriation that Scout had attempted. Derek Martinez requested a meeting to discuss expanding our partnership as Summit Adventures prepared to launch international ecotourism programs that would require sophisticated environmental assessment capabilities. Our professional relationship had evolved into genuine collaboration based on mutual respect and clearly defined boundaries, demonstrating that business partnerships could transcend personal history when built on appropriate legal foundations. Maya, the international expansion of Summiting Ventures depends entirely on our ability to demonstrate world-class environmental stewardship, Derek explained during our meeting in the Institute's client consultation room. Your methodology has become our competitive advantage in attracting clients who want authentic ecotourism experiences rather than superficial outdoor recreation. His transformation from someone who had enabled intellectual property theft to a genuine advocate for environmental protection reflected the broader changes that had rippled throughout Cascade Valley's outdoor recreation industry. The exposure of Scout's plagiarism had prompted serious examination of ethical standards across the entire community. The partnership with Summit Adventures had generated substantial revenue for GreenPath while providing Derek's business with the environmental credentials necessary to compete in the increasingly sophisticated ecotourism market. More importantly, the collaboration had demonstrated that sustainable outdoor recreation could be both environmentally responsible and commercially successful. Michael Brooks contacted me personally to discuss the National Park Service's plans to adopt my methodology as the standard approach for all future trail development projects throughout the federal park system. The success of the Whispering Pines expansion had convinced park administrators that predictive impact assessment represented the future of sustainable recreation management. Maya, the results from Whispering Pines have exceeded every projection we made about long-term environmental protection, Brooks explained during our phone conversation. Wildlife populations have remained stable despite increased visitor numbers, trail degradation has been minimal, and visitor satisfaction scores are the highest in our regional system. The comprehensive success of the Whispering Pines project had created a model that other park systems wanted to replicate, generating consulting opportunities throughout North America and beyond. The project had proven that sophisticated environmental assessment could enhance rather than restrict recreational access to wilderness areas. Dr. Sarah Martinez from the University of Washington's Wildlife Behavior Laboratory visited the Institute to discuss establishing a formal research partnership that would expand the psychological components of my methodology to include behavioral responses of endangered species to human presence. Her collaboration had been instrumental in developing the wildlife psychology aspects that distinguished my approach from conventional environmental assessment techniques. Maya, the behavioral research component of your methodology represents a paradigm shift in how we understand human impacts on wildlife communities, Dr. Martinez explained as we toured the Institute's new research facilities. The National Science Foundation is interested in funding expanded research that could revolutionize conservation biology applications across multiple ecosystems. The prospect of National Science Foundation support would provide resources for fundamental research that could advance environmental science beyond the practical applications that had initially driven my methodology development. The combination of applied consulting work and basic research would position the Institute at the forefront of conservation innovation. Jake Henderson approached me about developing a comprehensive case study of the Scout plagiarism incident for presentation at marketing conferences throughout the outdoor recreation industry. His experience managing the public relations aspects of Summit Adventures' recovery from association with intellectual property theft had given him unique insights into reputation management and ethical business practices. Maya, the story of how you exposed and overcame Scout's theft has become legendary in our industry, Jake explained during his presentation proposal meeting. Business schools are using it as a case study in intellectual property protection, while marketing professionals want to understand how authentic innovation can triumph over appropriation through strategic communication. The educational value of our experience extended beyond environmental science to broader questions about protecting intellectual property, maintaining professional relationships, and defending principles under pressure. The case study would help other professionals navigate similar challenges while reinforcing the importance of ethical standards in competitive business environments.
The autumn colors were reaching peak intensity throughout Cascade Valley as I prepared for the annual Green Path Environmental Institute Symposium, an international gathering that had become the premier forum for sharing innovations in wilderness preservation methodology. Researchers and practitioners from around the world would present their work while learning about cutting-edge approaches to environmental assessment and conservation planning. This year's symposium featured presentations from teams who had adapted my methodology for diverse applications, ranging from urban park development to marine sanctuary management. The breadth for successful implementations demonstrated the universal applicability of the predictive modeling principles that I had originally developed for trail impact assessment. The keynote presentation would be delivered by Dr. James Wilson, the newly appointed director of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, who planned to announce a global initiative for standardizing environmental assessment methodologies based on the innovations pioneered at our institute. His endorsement would establish my approach as the international standard for predictive impact modeling. Pat had spent months coordinating the symposium logistics, her academic experience proving invaluable in managing the complex
requirements of hosting an international scientific conference. The event would showcase the Institute's capabilities while providing networking opportunities that would generate future collaboration and consulting projects. Ryan had expanded his role beyond business operations to include strategic planning for the Institute's continued growth, his vision encompassing educational programs, research initiatives, and consulting services that would serve conservation needs throughout the global environmental community. His early faith in my methodology's potential had been vindicated beyond anything he had initially imagined possible. The symposium's opening ceremony took place in the Institute's new auditorium, designed with sustainable materials and energy-efficient systems that demonstrated our commitment to environmental responsibility in all aspects of our operations. The facility represented the physical manifestation of values that had guided our work since the earliest days of fighting to protect my intellectual property from appropriation. Emma had created visual presentations that effectively communicated the complex scientific concepts underlying my methodology to the diverse international audience, her graphic design skills helping bridge language and cultural barriers that might otherwise impede understanding. Her contribution to the Institute's success extended far beyond marketing materials to include fundamental communication strategies. During my opening address to the symposium participants, I reflected on the journey that had led from Scout's betrayal to international recognition for environmental innovation. The attempted theft that had initially seemed likely to destroy my career had ultimately catalyzed achievements that exceeded anything I had previously considered possible. The methodology that brings us together today emerged from a commitment to protecting wilderness areas through scientific rigor and predictive analysis, I explained to the assembled researchers and practitioners. But its development also required defending intellectual property rights and maintaining ethical standards when confronted with appropriation and betrayal. The audience included several participants who had faced similar challenges with intellectual property theft, their experiences reinforcing the universal importance of protecting authentic innovation from fraudulent appropriation. The sharing of strategies and support systems created a network of mutual assistance that strengthened the entire environmental research community. Dr. Martinez presented research findings that demonstrated how the psychological components of my methodology had contributed to successful conservation outcomes for endangered species throughout the Pacific Northwest. Her data showed measurable improvements in wildlife population stability and reproductive success when trail systems were designed using predictive behavioral modeling. Derek presented Summit Adventure's experience implementing environmental assessment requirements for international ecotourism operations, his business serving as a model for how outdoor recreation companies could integrate sophisticated environmental protection into commercially successful operations. His transformation from enabler of theft to champion of authentic innovation demonstrated the positive changes possible when businesses committed to ethical practices. The symposium's technical sessions featured presentations from research teams who had adapted my methodology for applications I had never envisioned during its original development.
Marine biologists were using predictive modeling to assess the impacts of underwater recreation activities on coral reef ecosystems, while urban planners were applying similar principles to design park systems that balanced conservation with public access in densely populated metropolitan areas. The diversity of successful applications reinforced the fundamental soundness of the theoretical framework underlying my methodology, validating the years of intensive research that had preceded Scout's attempted appropriation. The broad applicability that attracted international interest also provided protection against future theft, as the complexity and depth of understanding required for proper implementation created natural barriers to superficial copying. Michael Brooks announced the National Park Service's decision to establish a permanent research partnership with the Green Path Environmental Institute, creating ongoing collaboration that would advance both practical conservation applications and fundamental scientific understanding of human impacts on wilderness ecosystems. The partnership would provide stable funding while ensuring that park management decisions incorporated the most current research findings. The final day of the symposium featured presentations from early career researchers who had received training in my methodology through the Institute's certification programs. Their work demonstrated how authentic education and mentorship could propagate innovations throughout the scientific community while maintaining the standards and principles that protected against inappropriate appropriation. As the symposium concluded with commitments for expanded international collaboration and research partnerships, I felt profound satisfaction about the positive changes that had emerged from confronting Scout's theft directly rather than allowing the appropriation to proceed unchallenged. The decision to expose intellectual property theft catalyzed achievements that benefited not just my personal career, but the broader environmental conservation community. The evening reception provided opportunities for informal discussions with researchers and practitioners whose work would carry forward the innovations pioneered at our institute. The networking generated collaborative relationships that would advance environmental science while creating personal connections that enriched the professional community. Emma documented the symposium's major presentations and outcomes for the Institute's annual report, her visual storytelling helping communicate our impact to funding organizations and potential partners around the world. Her consistent support throughout the Institute's development had been instrumental in maintaining focus on core values during rapid expansion and international recognition. Pat reflected on the transformation we had witnessed since the dark days when Scout's plagiarism threatened to derail everything we had worked to achieve. Her mentorship had provided guidance and credibility that enabled my innovations to reach their full potential while maintaining the scientific rigor that protected against superficial imitation. Ryan celebrated the Institute's evolution from struggling startup to internationally recognized research center.
Recognized research center, his business acumen having managed the practical challenges of rapid growth while preserving the conservation mission that motivated our original partnership. His vision of creating lasting impact through environmental innovation had been realized beyond anything we had initially dared hope. As winter settled over Cascade Valley and the Institute prepared for its next phase of expansion and innovation, I reflected on the remarkable journey that had led from Scout's betrayal to international recognition for environmental leadership. The attempted theft of my intellectual property had ultimately catalyzed the very success that Scout had hoped to achieve through appropriation. The methodology that she had tried to steal was now being applied to wilderness preservation projects throughout the world, fulfilling its intended purpose of protecting ecosystems while accommodating human recreation needs. The irony that her attempted appropriation had accelerated rather than hindered legitimate implementation of my innovations provided a satisfying conclusion to a crisis that had once seemed likely to destroy my career. The MacArthur Fellowship announcement generated media attention that highlighted not just my technical innovations, but the broader story of defending intellectual property rights against fraudulent appropriation.
The coverage reinforced messages about the importance of authentic innovation and ethical behavior in scientific research, contributing to professional standards that would protect other researchers from similar theft. The Institute's success had created employment opportunities for dozens of environmental professionals while generating economic benefits throughout Cascade Valley's community. The positive local impact demonstrated that defending principles and pursuing excellence could create broad benefits extending far beyond individual achievement or recognition. The partnership with Derek's Summit Adventures had evolved into a model for how business relationships could transcend personal history when built on mutual respect and clearly defined boundaries. Our collaboration demonstrated that professional success could emerge from principled approaches to conflict resolution and strategic cooperation. Scout's continued absence from the environmental consulting community served as a reminder of the consequences of intellectual property theft, but I took no personal satisfaction in her professional exile. Justice had emerged through exposure of the truth rather than vindictive punishment, allowing natural consequences to reinforce ethical standards without requiring personal retaliation. The success of the Whispering Pines Trail expansion project had become a showcase for sustainable outdoor recreation development, attracting visitors and researchers from around the world who wanted to understand how sophisticated environmental assessment could enhance rather than restrict public access to wilderness areas. As I prepared for the next phase of the Institute's development, including expanded international programs and advanced research initiatives, I felt grateful for the unexpected path that had led from crisis to triumph. The confrontation that had seemed likely to destroy my career had instead provided the platform for achievements that exceeded anything I had previously imagined possible. The story that had begun with betrayal and theft had evolved into a testament to the power of authentic innovation, principled confrontation, and strategic collaboration in advancing environmental science and wilderness preservation. The professional recognition and conservation impact that resulted demonstrated that defending intellectual property rights served purposes far beyond personal vindication, contributing to the integrity and effectiveness of the entire scientific enterprise.